The cursor blinked mockingly at Sarah Chen as she stared at the encrypted folder labeled Blackwater_contingency that had just appeared in her file system, a folder she definitely hadn't created, containing data she definitely wasn't authorized to see. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, forgotten beside her keyboard as she'd worked through another late night organizing the digital archives for the Defense Intelligence Agency's Southeast Asia Division. What had started as routine file maintenance had transformed into something that made her hands shake as she scrolled through classified communications between her commanding officer, Colonel Marcus Webb, and what appeared to be foreign intelligence contacts. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she read. Timestamps showing these communications had been ongoing for 18 months, the exact period when 3 major operations in the region had been compromised, resulting in the deaths of 2 field agents and the capture of a high-value asset. The same operations Colonel Webb had personally overseen. The same operations where he'd been praised for his unfortunate but unavoidable intelligence. Failures. Her finger hovered over the delete key, every instinct screaming at her to pretend she'd never seen this, to go back to her mundane world of filing systems and data organization. But as she read deeper into the documents, seeing names of agents she'd processed paperwork for, agents who were now dead, Sarah realized she was already in too deep. The folder hadn't appeared by accident. Someone had placed it there, and that someone knew she was one of the few people with the access levels and technical knowledge to understand what she was looking at. The question was, had she been chosen as an ally or as the next loose end to be eliminated? Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, I want to take a moment to thank you for watching, creating and narrating these detailed novel-length stories takes tremendous time and research to bring you the most engaging content possible. We're embarking on a journey of nearly 50,000 words together. That's a full novella. If you're already hooked by what you've heard, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing this story with someone who would enjoy it, and subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest stories. This is going to be an epic adventure, so get comfortable. And let's continue with this remarkable tale. Sarah single quotes. S ordinary world had always been one of organized chaos, servers humming in climate-controlled rooms, endless streams of data flowing through secure networks, and the quiet satisfaction of bringing order to digital disorder. At 28, she'd spent 6 years as a civilian contractor for the DIA, invisible to most of the officers and agents who relied on her work. She was the person who made sure classified files didn't disappear into digital limbo, who maintained the databases that kept operations running smoothly, who noticed when things didn't add up in ways that others missed. The Crypto Intelligence Support Center occupied the 3rd floor of a nondescript building in Arlington, Virginia, its windows tinted black and its existence known only to those with the appropriate clearances. Sarah's cubicle sat in the corner of the main floor, surrounded by towers of backup drives and monitors displaying scrolling code. Her colleagues, a mix of former military IT specialists and civilian tech experts, rarely bothered her, recognizing that she worked best when left alone with her systems and spreadsheets. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday when Sarah first noticed the anomaly. She'd been running a routine audit of the Southeast Asia Division's file structure, looking for corrupted data and duplicate files that could slow down the system. The work was methodical, almost meditative, requiring the kind of attention to detail that came naturally to her analytical mind. She'd started at 6 p.m., long after most of her colleagues had gone home, enjoying the quiet of the nearly empty building. Blackwater_contingency folder appeared during a deep scan of Colonel Webb's classified directory, a directory she technically had read access to but rarely needed to explore. The folder's creation timestamp showed it had been generated at 11:43 p.m., just 4 minutes earlier, but its contents dated back over a year. More troubling was the folder's encryption signature, which matched administrative protocols Sarah recognized. From the most sensitive compartmentalized information she'd ever handled, Colonel Marcus Webb commanded respect throughout the building. At 52, he was a decorated veteran of 3 conflicts, a man whose silver hair and stern demeanor made junior officers stand straighter when he passed. Sarah had interacted with him only a handful of times, usually when he needed specific files retrieved from deep archives, or when her security protocols required his authorization. He'd always been professional, if distant, acknowledging her work with brief nods and efficient requests. But as Sarah opened the first document in the Blackwater_contingency folder, her image of Colonel Webb began to crumble. The file contained a series of encrypted messages between Webb and someone identified only as Magpie, discussing the timing of Operation Seahawk, an intelligence gathering mission in the South China Sea that had gone catastrophically wrong 6 months earlier. According to official reports, Seahawk had failed due to unexpected Chinese naval presence in the target area. According to these messages, Webb had provided advance warning of the operation's timeline and objectives to his foreign contact. Sarah's hands trembled as she copied the folder to an encrypted external drive, a breach of protocol that could cost her job and security clearance. But the implications of what she was reading demanded preservation. Agent Maria Santos and Agent David Kim had died during Seahawk when their extraction failed. Their families had been told they died serving their country, never knowing their deaths had been orchestrated by their own commanding officer. The second folder in the Fiowan Blackwater_contingency archive contained financial records, cryptocurrency transactions, offshore accounts, and payment schedules that painted a picture of systematic betrayal spanning 18 months. Webb had been receiving payments of $50,000 monthly, with bonuses for specific intelligence deliveries. The amounts corresponded with compromised operations, failed missions, and leaked strategic information that had cost American intelligence assets across Southeast Asia. As Sarah delved deeper into the files, she discovered a complex web of corruption involving not just Webb, but potentially other officers in the chain of command. Code names appeared throughout the documents: Magpie Cardinal and Raven, suggesting a network of informants and handlers operating within the intelligence community. Webb appeared to be Cardinal, a middle management asset providing operational intelligence to foreign interests. The most damning evidence came in the form of recorded phone conversations, their audio files timestamped and GPS tagged to Webb's office and personal residence. In these recordings, Webb discussed upcoming operations with his handler, providing details about agent movements, safe house locations, and planned intelligence gathering activities. His voice was calm, professional, discussing the lives of his subordinates as if they were commodities to be traded. Sarah realized she wasn't just looking at evidence of treason. She was looking at an active conspiracy that was still ongoing. The most recent communications were dated just 3 days earlier, discussing Operation Monsoon, a planned infiltration of a suspected weapons trafficking network in Thailand. According to the files, Monsoon was scheduled to begin in 72 hours. With agents already in position, the weight of her discovery crashed down on her as she sat alone in the humming server room, surrounded by the digital infrastructure that processed America's most sensitive intelligence. She was a file clerk who'd stumbled into a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of her command structure. Every protocol she'd been trained to follow report suspicious activity through the chain of command was potentially compromised if Webb wasn't acting alone. Sarah's first instinct was to contact her immediate supervisor, but David Morrison was Webb's longtime friend and had served under him in Afghanistan. Her second thought was the FBI, but she had no way of knowing how far the corruption extended or whether federal law enforcement had been infiltrated as well. The paranoia that infected intelligence work suddenly felt very real and very personal. She spent the rest of the night copying files, creating multiple encrypted backups on different storage devices, and researching secure communication methods that wouldn't be monitored by DIA systems. By dawn, she had assembled a comprehensive dossier of evidence that could destroy Webb's career and potentially save the lives of agents currently in the field. But as she prepared to leave the building, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. The security logs showed that someone had accessed the building's network remotely during the night, specifically targeting her workstation. Someone had been watching her discover the Blackwater_contingency files. Someone knew exactly what she'd found. The elevator ride to the parking garage felt endless, every floor bringing new possibilities for confrontation. Had she been set up? Was this an elaborate test of her loyalty? Or had she accidentally triggered an alarm system that would soon bring Webb's associates to silence her permanently? As Sarah reached her car, she noticed a black sedan in the visitor parking area that hadn't been there when she'd arrived the previous evening. Its windows were tinted, its license plate obscured by shadows, and she could just make out the silhouette of someone sitting in the driver's seat. When she started her engine, the sedan's lights came on. The drive home through the empty pre-dawn streets of Arlington became a cat-and-mouse game, with Sarah taking random turns and watching her mirrors. The sedan followed at a distance, maintaining visual contact, but never getting close enough for her to identify the driver. By the time she reached her apartment complex, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely turn the steering wheel. Sarah lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a building that housed mostly government contractors and junior military personnel. It was an anonymous place where residents kept to themselves and asked few questions about each other's work. As she climbed the stairs to her floor, she noticed that the hallway light outside her apartment had burned out, leaving her door in shadows, her key stuck in the lock, something that had never happened before, and she could hear the faint sound of electronics humming inside her apartment. Sarah's training kicked in as she realized her home had been searched, probably bugged, and was likely under surveillance. She palmed the encrypted drive containing the Blackwater_contingency files and backed away from her door. The stairwell emergency exit led to an alley behind the building, where Sarah had a clear view of the parking area. The black sedan was parked across the street, still occupied. But now she could see a second vehicle, a gray van with communications equipment, visible through its rear windows. Her apartment building was under professional surveillance. Sarah's mind raced through her options as she crouched in the alley, clutching the evidence that could expose a traitor but might also get her killed. She couldn't go home, couldn't trust her chain of command, and couldn't be certain who else might be involved in Webb's conspiracy. But she had something her enemies didn't know. She possessed 6 years of experience navigating the intelligence community's digital infrastructure and a deep understanding of how information flowed through the system. The sun was beginning to rise over Arlington as Sarah made her decision. She wouldn't run, and she wouldn't hide. Instead, she would use her skills to turn the surveillance network against itself, to expose Webb's treason through the same systems he'd used to betray his country. But first, she needed allies, people she could trust, who had the authority and resources to act on her evidence. As she walked away from her compromised apartment, Sarah began composing a mental list of the few people in the intelligence community she trusted completely. The list was shorter than she'd hoped, but it included names with the clearance levels and moral conviction necessary to help her navigate the dangerous path ahead. The game had begun, and Sarah Chen, file clerk, data analyst, and accidental spy, was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous battles are fought not with weapons, but with information. Sarah's safe house was a 24-hour diner in Fairfax, Virginia, the kind of place where night shift workers grabbed coffee and insomniacs found refuge from their demons. She discovered it during her first year at the DIA, when stress and irregular sleep patterns had driven her to wander the suburbs in search of somewhere to think. The Starlight Diner never asked questions, served decent coffee, and had Wi-Fi that didn't require registration, perfect for someone who needed to disappear into the digital world. At 6:30 a.m., Sarah sat in a corner booth with her laptop, 3 encrypted drives, and a growing sense that she was being hunted by professionals. The morning rush had begun, providing cover in the form of construction workers, nurses ending their shifts, and early commuters grabbing breakfast. She'd positioned herself with a clear view of the parking lot and both exits, habits learned from security briefings she'd never expected to need. Her first priority was establishing secure communication with potential allies. Sarah's mental list had narrowed to 3 names: Agent Jennifer Liu from the FBI's Counterintelligence Division, whom she'd met during a joint task force briefing; Captain Rachel Torres from Naval Intelligence, who'd impressed Sarah with her integrity during a previous collaboration; and Dr. Michael Harrison, a civilian analyst at the NSA, whose reputation for honesty was legendary within the intelligence community. But contacting any of them through official channels would create a digital trail that Webb's associates could follow. Sarah needed a method that wouldn't trigger monitoring systems while still providing verification of her identity and the authenticity of her evidence. The solution came from an unexpected source: a secure communication protocol she discovered while organizing files from a disbanded cyber warfare unit. The Ghost Protocol had been developed for agents operating in hostile territories where traditional communication methods were compromised. It used a combination of steganography, dead drops in cloud storage systems, and coded messages hidden within seemingly innocent digital content. Sarah had never expected to use it herself, but 6 years of organizing classified files had given her access to operational procedures most people never saw. Her first message went to Agent Liu, embedded within a restaurant review posted to a public forum. To casual observers, it appeared to be a complaint about service at a Vietnamese restaurant in Falls Church. But to someone who knew the Ghost Protocol codes, it contained Sarah's identity verification, a meeting request, and a hint about the nature of her evidence. The message would take hours to reach Liu through the circuitous route of digital dead drops, but it would be untraceable to anyone monitoring conventional communication channels. While waiting for responses, Sarah began analyzing the Blackwater_contingency files more systematically, looking for patterns that might reveal the full scope of Webb's conspiracy. Her background in data analysis proved invaluable as she cross-referenced timestamps, financial transactions, and operational schedules to build a comprehensive picture of the trail. The pattern that emerged was more sophisticated than simple corruption. Webb's intelligence leaks followed a careful schedule designed to maximize damage while minimizing suspicion. He provided information about operations that would fail spectacularly, drawing attention away from subtler intelligence, gathering activities that succeeded because of his cooperation. The strategy created a false pattern of incompetence that masked deliberate treason. More troubling was the discovery that Webb's information had been used not just to compromise American operations, but to facilitate successful attacks against allied intelligence services. British agents had died in Myanmar, German operatives had been captured in Laos, and Australian intelligence gathering efforts had been systematically defeated, all because Webb had provided their operational details to foreign handlers. Sarah's analysis revealed that Magpie, Webb's primary handler, was likely a senior officer in Chinese military intelligence, based on communication patterns and coded references to Beijing-based assets. The relationship between Webb and Magpie showed signs of long-term cultivation, suggesting Webb had been recruited years earlier and carefully developed as a strategic asset within American intelligence. As she worked, Sarah became aware of subtle changes in the diner's atmosphere. New customers had arrived, a man in a business suit who ordered only coffee and spent his time reading newspapers while watching the room, a woman with a communication earpiece who sat near the counter, and a maintenance worker who seemed to B. Taking an unusually long time to fix a bathroom door that hadn't appeared broken. The surveillance was professional, but not invisible to someone who knew what to look for. Sarah realized her pursuers had found her location, probably through facial recognition systems or by monitoring her credit card use. She had perhaps minutes before they moved to apprehend her, but running would only confirm their suspicions and eliminate her chance to expose Webb's conspiracy. Instead, Sarah activated a contingency plan she'd been developing throughout the morning. Using the diner's Wi-Fi, she uploaded encrypted copies of the Blackwater_contingency files to multiple cloud storage services, each protected by different passwords and accessible through separate anonymous accounts. She then embedded the access codes within a series of social media posts, blog comments, and forum discussions, creating a distributed dead drop system that would preserve the evidence even if she were captured. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Verify location. Safety uncertain. RLT. The initials matched those of Rachel Torres, and the message format indicated she'd received and understood Sarah's ghost protocol communication. Sarah's reply was equally cryptic. Starlight Diner, Fairfax. Company arriving uninvited. The response came within seconds. Extract in 5. Northeast corner parking lot. Blue sedan. Sarah's heart pounded as she realized rescue was imminent, but she also understood that accepting help from Torres would confirm her possession of sensitive information and potentially endanger the Naval intelligence officer. Every decision now carried consequences that extended far beyond her own safety. The man in the business suit stood up and began walking toward her booth, his movement casual but purposeful. Sarah gathered her equipment and headed for the bathroom, using the crowd of morning customers as cover. The maintenance worker was gone, but the bathroom window had been left slightly open, not for repairs, but as an escape route that someone had prepared. Sarah squeezed through the window into the alley behind the diner, her laptop bag catching on the frame as sirens began wailing in the distance. The blue sedan was exactly where Torres had promised, engine running, driver's door open. But as Sarah ran toward safety, she saw the black sedan from her apartment complex turning into the parking lot, its occupants finally making their move. Captain Rachel Torres was a compact woman in her mid-30s with the calm demeanor of someone accustomed to high-pressure situations. She barely looked at Sarah as she dove into the passenger seat, instead focusing on the mirrors as she accelerated out of the parking lot. "Seatbelt," she said quietly. "This is going to get interesting." The pursuit that followed wove through the suburban streets of Fairfax County, with Torres demonstrating driving skills that suggested extensive evasive training. She used traffic patterns, construction zones, and her knowledge of local geography to gradually distance their vehicle from the surveillance team. But Sarah could see in Torres's expression that they weren't just running from Webb's associates. They were now both targets of a conspiracy that had resources and reach throughout the intelligence community. "What did you find?" Torres asked, as they finally stopped in the parking garage of a shopping mall in Vienna. Sarah handed her one of the encrypted drives. "Everything. Financial records, communications with foreign handlers, operational intelligence that got agents killed. Webb's been selling us out for 18 months. Torres's face hardened as she scrolled through the files on her tablet. "Jesus Christ. Operation Seahawk, the Myanmar disaster, the Australian intelligence failure, all of it was Webb." "There's more," Sarah said. "Operation Monsoon is scheduled to begin in 48 hours. According to these files, Webb's already provided the operational details to his handlers. The agents going in are walking into a trap." Torres was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. "We need to get this to someone who can stop Monsoon and arrest Webb, but we can't trust the normal channels. If Webb has been operating for 18 months without detection, he has protection somewhere in the system." Sarah had been thinking about the same problem. "I sent coded messages to Agent Liu at the FBI," and Dr. Harrison at NSA. If we can verify they're clean, we might have enough allies to move against Webb. And if they're not clean, then we're probably dead. Torres started the engine again. There's a safe house I know about off the books, used by naval intelligence for situations like this. We can fortify there and plan our next move. As they drove deeper into the Virginia countryside, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in less than 24 hours. Yesterday, she'd been an anonymous file clerk whose biggest concern was organizing digital archives. Today, she was a fugitive carrying evidence of treason, trusting her life to a naval intelligence officer she barely knew, but the files in her possession represented more than just evidence of Webb's betrayal. They were the key to saving the lives of agents currently in the field and potentially exposing a broader conspiracy within American intelligence. The weight of that responsibility was overwhelming, but Sarah realized she was perhaps the only person in position to act on what she'd discovered. The safe house was a modest cabin on 20 acres of wooded land, equipped with secure communications equipment and defensive measures that suggested it had been used for similar situations before. Torres explained that it was maintained by a small group of intelligence officers who believed that sometimes the system needed to be protected from itself. As evening approached, Sarah and Torres prepared for what could be their final night of freedom. Tomorrow they would either successfully expose Webb's conspiracy or become casualties of a system they'd devoted their careers to serving. But tonight, in the quiet of the Virginia woods, they planned the operation that would determine whether justice could still prevail within the intelligence community they'd sworn to protect. We're deep into this incredible story now, and I hope you're as captivated as I am by these unfolding events. The amount of effort that goes into researching, writing, and narrating these novel-length stories is immense. We're talking about creating content equivalent to a published book. But it's worth it to bring you stories that truly engage and transport you to another world. If you're enjoying this journey so far, please take a second to like this video and share it with friends who appreciate great storytelling. Your support means everything and helps us continue creating these detailed, epic narratives. We still have so much more to discover together. So let's see how this situation unfolds. The Safe House Communications Array hummed to life at 0800 hours, connecting Sarah and Torres to what would become the most dangerous briefing of their careers. Dr. Michael Harrison's face appeared on the encrypted video link from NSA headquarters, his expression grave as he processed the intelligence Sarah had provided through ghost protocol channels. "I've confirmed the authenticity of your files," Harrison said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too many betrayals in 30 years of intelligence work. "The encryption signatures match NSA protocols from Webb's clearance level, and the financial transactions correlate with several anomalous intelligence failures we've been investigating independently." Agent Jennifer Liu joined the conference from her FBI field office, her background showing the sterile environment of federal law enforcement. "I've been tracking unusual patterns in counterintelligence cases for the past year," she reported. "Operations that failed just before crucial arrests, sources that went silent without explanation, surveillance operations that were somehow anticipated by their targets. Your Colonel Webb's timeline matches perfectly with every failure." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and terror as her evidence was validated by people who understood its implications. But she also realized that confirmation of Webb's guilt was only the beginning of a much larger problem. "The immediate crisis is Operation Monsoon," Torres interjected, bringing up operational maps on her tablet. According to the Blackwater_contingency files, Webb provided complete operational details to his handlers 3 days ago. Agents Morrison and Park are already in position in Bangkok, preparing for infiltration of the weapons trafficking network. They have no idea they're walking into a trap. Harrison's fingers flew across his keyboard as he accessed NSA monitoring systems. I'm showing increased electronic surveillance activity in the Bangkok operational area. Someone is definitely tracking American assets, using equipment and techniques consistent with Chinese military intelligence. Can we abort Monsoon? Sarah asked. Not through normal channels, Liu replied. Webb is the operational commander. Any abort order would have to come through him or his immediate superiors, and we don't know how far the conspiracy extends. Torres stood up and began pacing the small room, her military training evident in her systematic approach to the problem. We need a two-pronged strategy. First, we find a way to warn Norrison and Park without alerting Webb's network. Second, we gather enough evidence to present to someone high enough in the chain of command to authorize Webb's arrest. The warning is the easier part, Sarah said, surprising herself with her growing confidence in tradecraft she'd never expected to use. I have access to emergency communication protocols that bypass normal command structures. I can reach Morrison and Park directly, but it will burn whatever operational security they have left. Harrison nodded approvingly. Do it. Their lives are more important than operational security at this point. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she composed the emergency message using codes she'd memorized from classified manuals. The communication would appear as a routine system maintenance notification, but agents trained in Ghost Protocol would recognize the embedded warning about compromise and extraction procedures. The message was transmitted through satellite relays that bounced the signal through 3 countries before reaching the secure phones Morrison and Park carried. Within minutes, Sarah's screen showed confirmation of receipt, followed by a coded acknowledgement that the agents understood they were blown and were initiating emergency extraction. Phase 1 complete, Sarah announced. But we've probably triggered alarms throughout Webb's network. They'll know someone with high-level access is working against them. As if summoned by her words, Torres' secure phone began buzzing with an incoming call from DIA headquarters. The caller ID showed Colonel Webb's office extension. Don't answer, Liu warned. He's fishing to see who's still in play. But Torres was already reaching for the phone. If I don't answer, he'll know I'm involved. I need to maintain cover for as long as possible. She connected the call and activated the recording function. Captain Torres, this is Colonel Webb. I understand you had some contact with Sarah Chen recently. I need you to report to my office immediately for debriefing. Torres's voice remained steady despite the obvious trap. Sir, I'm currently in Norfolk, briefing Admiral Patterson on the Malaysian Intelligence Cooperation Framework. I can return to Arlington tomorrow afternoon. That won't be acceptable, Captain. I need you here within 4 hours, or I'll have to consider you a WOL and potentially compromised. The threat was barely veiled, but Torres maintained her professional demeanor. Understood, sir. I'll arrange transportation immediately. After ending the call, Torres turned to the others. That confirms it. Webb knows I'm involved, which means he probably knows about all of you as well. We're running out of time. Harrison had been monitoring NSA surveillance systems during the call. I'm showing multiple federal agencies suddenly requesting surveillance. Authorizations for locations associated with your identities. FBI, CIA, even DHS. Someone with serious pull is mobilizing resources to find you. Sarah felt the walls closing in as she realized the full extent of Webb's influence. How high does this go? If he can mobilize multiple agencies, he's not just a middle management traitor. He's part of something much bigger. Liu's expression darkened as she accessed FBI internal communications. I'm seeing classified alerts being distributed to field offices nationwide. You're all being labeled as persons of interest in a national security investigation. The alerts are coming from the deputy director level. The cabin suddenly felt very small as the 4 intelligence professionals processed the implications. They weren't just fighting against one corrupt colonel. They were facing a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the American intelligence community. "We need to go public," Sarah said quietly. "If the system is too compromised to handle this internally, we have to expose it through external channels." "Absolutely not," Torres replied immediately. "That would destroy American intelligence capabilities for a generation. Every asset, every operation, every relationship we've built would be compromised," Harrison agreed. "The collateral damage would be catastrophic. Foreign intelligence services would roll up our entire network within weeks." But Sarah had been thinking about this possibility since discovering the Blackwater_contingency files. What's the alternative? Let Webb and his conspiracy continue operating until they've sold out every American agent in Southeast Asia? How many more Maria Santos and David Kims have to die? The debate was interrupted by alarms from the cabin security system. Motion sensors had detected vehicles approaching through the woods, moving without lights in a coordinated pattern that suggested military or law enforcement training. Torres rushed to the security monitors, cursing as she saw the tactical situation developing outside. 6 vehicles, at least 20 personnel, professional formation. They found us. Sarah grabbed her laptop and the encrypted drives containing the Blackwater_contingency evidence. "Is there another way out?" "Service tunnel to the generator shed, then through the woods to a backup vehicle," Torres replied, already moving toward a concealed panel in the floor. "But they probably have the area surrounded." Liu was monitoring FBI communications through her secure connection. "This isn't an FBI operation. I'm not seeing any federal warrants or coordination through my channels. This is private security, probably contractors working for Webb's network." The realization that they were being hunted by mercenaries rather than law enforcement officers was both terrifying and liberating. These weren't federal agents following legal procedures. They were criminals trying to cover up treason. As Torres led them through the service tunnel, Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She activated a dead man switch she'd programmed into her secure cloud storage system, a protocol that would automatically release the Blackwater_contingency files to multiple journalists and congressional oversight committees if she failed to check in within 24 hours. "What did you just do?" Harrison asked, seeing her typing on her phone as they crawled through the narrow tunnel. "Insurance," Sarah replied. "If they kill us, the truth comes out anyway." The backup vehicle was a nondescript SUV hidden in a maintenance shed half a mile from the main cabin. As they reached it, they could hear the sound of the safe house being breached behind them, doors splintering, flashbang grenades detonating, tactical teams securing rooms they'd abandoned minutes earlier. Torres started the engine and began driving without lights through service roads she'd memorized during previous visits to the safe house. Where can we go that they won't expect? Sarah had been considering the same question. "My sister lives in Richmond. She's a nurse, completely outside the intelligence community. They might not have connected her to me yet." "Too dangerous," Liu objected. "These people have already shown they're willing to kill to protect their operation. We can't involve civilians." But Harrison had another idea. "I know someone who might be able to help. Someone with the authority and integrity to act on this evidence without being compromised by Webb's network." "Who?" Torres asked. "Senator Margaret Sullivan, chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. She's been pushing for increased oversight of intelligence operations, and she has the security clearance to understand what we found." Sarah had heard of Senator Sullivan, a former prosecutor known for her relentless pursuit of government corruption. If anyone could be trusted with evidence of treason at the highest levels of intelligence community, it would be her. "Can you reach her?" Sarah asked. Harrison nodded. "She has secure communication capabilities for exactly this kind of situation. But approaching her directly will be crossing a line we can't uncross. Once we involve Congress, this becomes a political scandal that will reshape American intelligence for decades." As they drove through the Virginia countryside, 4 intelligence professionals who devoted their careers to protecting American interests faced the hardest decision of their lives. They could try to handle Webb's conspiracy internally, risking their lives and the lives of agents in the field, or they could expose the corruption publicly, potentially destroying the institutions they'd sworn to serve. Behind them, the safe house burned as Webb's associates eliminated evidence of the meeting that never officially happened. Ahead of them lay a confrontation with the most powerful figures in American intelligence, a battle that would determine whether the system could clean itself or whether it was too corrupt to save. Sarah clutched the encrypted drives that contained proof of Webb's treason, knowing that these small devices held the power to bring down a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. Tomorrow, she would discover whether that power was enough to save American intelligence from itself. Senator Margaret Sullivan's secure conference room on Capitol Hill resembled a high-tech bunker more than a traditional government office. Soundproof. Walls lined with copper mesh-blocked electronic surveillance, while multiple layers of encryption protected the communication systems that connected her to intelligence agencies worldwide. At 63, Sullivan had served on the Intelligence Committee for 12 years, long enough to develop a reputation for being impossible to intimidate and incorruptible in her pursuit of truth. Sarah sat across from the senator at 0600 hours, flanked by Torres, Liu, and Harrison, while her entire worldview shifted under the weight of what they'd discovered overnight. The evidence of Webb's conspiracy was damning enough, but the investigation that Sullivan's staff had conducted in the 6 hours since Harrison's initial contact had revealed something far more terrifying than simple treason. Colonel Webb is a symptom, not the disease, Sullivan began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with national security crises. My staff's preliminary investigation indicates that Blackwater is one of at least 7 active penetration operations targeting American intelligence. We're looking at systematic compromise that's been ongoing for years. The senator's aide, a former CIA analyst named David Reeves, distributed classified folders containing intelligence that made Sarah's original discovery look like a small piece of a much larger puzzle. Project Blackwater targets Southeast Asian operations, but we've identified similar patterns in European intelligence failures, Redwood, Middle Eastern operational compromises, Desert Storm, and African intelligence disasters, Savannah. Harrison studied the documents with growing alarm. This suggests coordination at levels we never imagined possible. Someone with access to the highest classification levels has been systematically identifying and recruiting assets throughout American intelligence. That's exactly what we believe, Sullivan confirmed. And the evidence suggests the coordination is coming from within the intelligence community itself, someone with access to personnel files, operational schedules, and financial records across multiple agencies. Liu's FBI training kicked in as she analyzed the pattern. This is a classic counterintelligence operation, but run in reverse. Instead of identifying foreign agents within our system, someone's been identifying our agents who can be turned into foreign assets. Torres was examining financial records that showed the scope of the corruption. The money flow analysis indicates this operation has been funded to the tune of over $50 million in the past 3 years. That's not opportunistic corruption. That's a systematic program to destroy American intelligence capabilities. Sarah felt overwhelmed as she realized her discovery of Webb's files had exposed something that threatened the foundation of American national security. Who has this kind of access? Who could coordinate recruitment across multiple agencies and operations? That's the question that's going to get us all killed, Sullivan replied grimly. Because the answer is someone at the deputy director level, or above, someone with cross-agency authority and access to the most compartmentalized information in the government. The briefing was interrupted by an urgent call from Senator Sullivan's security detail. 3 black SUVs had arrived at the Capitol building, carrying personnel who claimed to be conducting a classified briefing with the Intelligence Committee. The security chief reported that the visitors had valid federal identification, but their purpose didn't match any scheduled meetings. "They're here," Harrison said quietly. "Webb's network knows we've reached you." Sullivan's response demonstrated why she'd survived 12 years of intelligence oversight in Washington. "Mr. Reeves, activate the committee's emergency protocols. I want this room sealed and all our communications shifted to the backup systems. Senator Patterson and Senator Cole need to be briefed on this situation immediately." The room's security systems activated with a subtle hum as blast shutters sealed the windows and electromagnetic shielding isolated them from external surveillance. Sarah watched in fascination as the conference room transformed into a miniature command center, with displays showing real-time security feeds from throughout the Capitol complex. The individuals downstairs are carrying credentials from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, Reeves reported as he monitored security cameras. "But I'm not showing any scheduled meetings, and their arrival timing suggests they're responding to our contact with Dr. Harrison." Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized the implications. If they traced Harrison's communication to you, then they have access to NSA internal systems. The conspiracy isn't just recruiting assets, it's monitoring the agency's own personnel. Torres was studying the security feeds with professional interest. Their formation and equipment suggest they're not regular intelligence officers. This looks like a private military contractor setup, the same kind of people who hit the safe house. Which means they're not bound by federal law enforcement protocols, Liu added grimly. "They're not here to arrest us. They're here to eliminate witnesses." Senator Sullivan had been making secure phone calls while her aide briefed them on the security situation. "I've contacted the Vice President and the Speaker of the House. If something happens to us, they have copies of all your evidence and instructions to launch a full congressional investigation." But Sarah realized that protection wouldn't help the agents currently in the field, or prevent Webb's conspiracy from continuing to operate. "Senator, we need to take action now. Every hour we delay gives them time to eliminate more evidence and compromise more operations. What do you propose?" Sullivan asked. Sarah had been formulating a plan during the briefing, drawing on her deep understanding of how intelligence systems operated. "We turn their own network against them. If they're monitoring communications to track us, we use that monitoring to feed them false information while we expose the truth." Harrison looked intrigued. "A deception operation. We make them think we're moving in one direction while actually attacking from another." "Exactly," Sarah continued. "But it requires taking enormous risks. We have to make them believe they've neutralized the threat while actually preparing to expose everything publicly." Torres understood immediately. A false flag surrender. "We make them think they've won while actually positioning for the final attack." The plan that emerged over the next hour was audacious in its scope and terrifying in its implications. Sarah would appear to surrender to Webb's associates, carrying what appeared to be all the evidence of his conspiracy. But the real evidence would remain hidden, distributed through dead drop systems that would automatically activate if the deception failed. Meanwhile, Sullivan would use her congressional authority to launch what appeared to be a routine oversight inquiry into intelligence operational failures, drawing attention away from the true scope of their investigation. Harrison would return to NSA and continue monitoring the conspiracy's communications, while Liu and Torres coordinated with loyal agents to protect operations that hadn't yet been compromised. This plan requires trusting that Webb's associates will keep Sarah alive long enough for the deception to work, Sullivan warned. "If they decide to eliminate her immediately, we lose our best asset and possibly our only chance to expose the conspiracy." Sarah had been thinking about the same risk. "They won't kill me immediately because they need to know how much I've discovered and who else has access to the evidence. They'll want to interrogate me first, which gives us a window to act. The decision to proceed with the deception operation was made as security alarms began sounding throughout the Capitol complex. The individuals claiming to represent the Office of the Director of National Intelligence had apparently attempted to access restricted areas, triggering automated security protocols. They're not waiting for permission, Reeves reported. Capitol Police are responding to unauthorized access attempts on multiple floors. Sullivan stood up with the decisive manner of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. We're out of time. Sarah, are you certain you want to do this? Sarah looked around the room at the four people who'd risked their careers and lives to help her expose Webb's conspiracy. 3 days ago, she'd been an anonymous file clerk whose biggest challenge was organizing digital archives. Now she was preparing to walk into the hands of traitors in order to save American intelligence from systematic destruction. Unsure, she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. But I need guarantees that if this goes wrong, you'll still expose everything. The agents who died because of Webb's betrayal deserve justice, even if I don't survive to see it. The next 30 minutes were a flurry of preparation as they implemented the deception operation. Sarah prepared 2 sets of evidence, one containing the real Blackwater _ contingency files, which would remain hidden in cloud storage systems protected by deadman switches, and another containing carefully modified files that would appear complete, but actually concealed the most damaging evidence. Harrison established secure communication protocols that would allow him to monitor Sarah's situation without revealing the continued existence of their network. Liu coordinated with FBI assets who could provide backup if the deception was discovered. Torres prepared extraction procedures in case they needed to rescue Sarah from Webb's associates. As Sarah prepared to leave the secure conference room, Senator Sullivan handed her a small device that looked like an ordinary pen. Emergency beacon, she explained. If you're in immediate danger, activate this and every federal agency in the area will respond within minutes. The walk through the Capitol building to meet Webb's associates felt like the longest journey of Sarah's life. Behind her, she left the safety of congressional protection and the company of people who understood the magnitude of what they were attempting. Ahead of her lay a confrontation with traitors who'd already demonstrated their willingness to kill to protect their conspiracy. But as she approached the designated meeting point, Sarah carried with her something more powerful than fear, the knowledge that she'd already succeeded in the most important part of her mission. The evidence of Webb's treason was preserved and distributed, protected by systems that would ensure its release regardless of what happened to her. The 3 men waiting for her in the Capitol's visitor center looked exactly like what she'd expected: professional, nondescript, and dangerous. Their leader, a man in his 40s with the bearing of former military, approached her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ms. Chen, I'm Agent Phillips from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. We need to discuss some files you've been accessing inappropriately. Sarah handed him the modified evidence drive, noting how his associates positioned themselves to block her escape routes. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm just a file clerk who found some anomalous data. Phillips examined the drive, with equipment that verified its encryption and data signatures, apparently satisfied that he was receiving the genuine evidence. I'm sure we can clear this up quickly. We just need you to come with us for debriefing. As Sarah was escorted from the Capitol building toward a waiting black SUV, she activated the hidden communication device Harrison had given her, sending a coded signal that confirmed the deception operation was underway. Behind her in the secure conference room she'd just left, Senator Sullivan and her allies began implementing the second phase of their plan to expose the conspiracy that threatened American intelligence. The midpoint crisis had been reached. Sarah was now in the hands of the enemy, carrying evidence they believed was complete while the real evidence remained hidden and protected. The next few hours would determine whether her sacrifice would save American intelligence or whether Webb's conspiracy would succeed in destroying the system from within. As the SUV pulled away from the Capitol, Sarah Chen disappeared into the world of professional interrogation and systematic betrayal, trusting that the people she'd left behind would use the time her deception bought them to bring justice to those who'd sold out their country for money and power. The interrogation facility existed in a legal gray area between legitimate intelligence operations and criminal conspiracy. Converted warehouse in Alexandria where Webb's associates could operate without oversight from any official agency. Sarah had been transported there in a windowless van, her phone confiscated and her location carefully concealed from anyone who might attempt rescue. The room where they held her was professionally equipped for extracting information from unwilling subjects, but it lacked the bureaucratic safeguards that governed official interrogations. No lawyers, no oversight, no records, just Sarah, her captors, and the evidence they believed would allow them to contain the damage from her discovery. Agent Phillips, whose real name Sarah suspected wasn't Phillips, sat across from her at a metal table while technicians analyzed the modified evidence drive she'd surrendered. Behind him, Colonel Webb himself waited with the patient demeanor of someone confident that his conspiracy remained secure. The files you accessed contain sensitive information about ongoing operations, Phillips began, his tone suggesting reasonable discussion rather than hostile interrogation. We need to understand exactly what you saw and who else has access to this information. Sarah had prepared for this moment during the drive from the Capitol, mentally rehearsing responses that would buy time while revealing nothing about the real scope of their investigation. I found anomalous files in Colonel Webb's directory. During routine maintenance, I didn't understand what they were, so I copied them to investigate further. Webb stepped forward, his familiar voice carrying an edge of menace Sarah had never heard during their previous professional interactions. Miss Chen, we know you're more sophisticated than that. Your access logs show extensive analysis of classified materials, secure communications with federal agents, and coordination with Senator Sullivan's office. The confirmation that they'd been monitoring her activities completely was both terrifying and valuable. It meant they were confident they'd tracked all her actions, unaware of the deception operation currently underway. I was scared, Sarah replied, which was absolutely true. I found evidence that looked like criminal activity, so I reached out to people I thought might help me understand what to do. Phillips and Webb exchanged glances that suggested they were satisfied with her apparent cooperation. The modified evidence drive contained enough real information to convince them she was telling the truth about her discovery, while concealing the most damaging evidence and the full extent of their investigation. The files you found relate to a classified counterintelligence operation, Webb lied smoothly. Agent Phillips and his team have been using controlled leaks to identify foreign intelligence operatives attempting to penetrate American operations. What you interpreted as treason was actually an authorized deception operation. Sarah almost admired the creativity of the cover story, which would explain the communications with foreign handlers while positioning Webb as a loyal officer conducting complex counterintelligence work. If she hadn't seen the financial records and heard the recorded conversations, she might have believed it herself. I understand, she said, playing the role of confused civilian who'd stumbled into something beyond her comprehension. I just want to return to my normal work and forget this ever happened. But Phillips was studying her with the experienced eye of someone who'd conducted many interrogations. That would be ideal, Miss Chen, but first we need to ensure that's sensitive. Operational details don't leak to unauthorized personnel. You mentioned contacting federal agents. We'll need complete details about those communications. This was the crucial moment of the deception operation. Sarah provided carefully prepared information about her contacts with Liu, Harrison, and Torres, describing communications that had actually occurred, but omitting the security protocols and drop systems that protected the real evidence. Agent Liu at the FBI, Dr. Harrison at NSA, and Captain Torres from Naval Intelligence, she said. I sent them copies of what I found because I didn't know who else to trust. Webb's expression darkened as he realized the scope of the potential exposure. What was their response? Agent Liu said she'd investigate through official channels, Sarah lied. Dr. Harrison said the communications looked like counterintelligence work, and Captain Torres said I should report everything to my chain of command. The relief on Webb's face was visible as he processed what he believed was confirmation that the conspiracy remained contained. Did you provide copies of the files to anyone else? Family members, friends, journalists? No, Sarah replied honestly. I didn't understand what I was looking at well enough to involve civilians. Phillips seemed satisfied with her responses. But one of the technicians analyzing her evidence drive approached with a tablet displaying file metadata. Colonel, we're showing signs that some files may have been copied to external storage before her capture. Sarah's heart raced as she realized they detected traces of her real evidence preservation efforts. I made backup copies on my personal laptop, she admitted, hoping to redirect their suspicions toward less dangerous possibilities. Standard procedure for any files I'm analyzing. Where is this laptop? Webb demanded. My apartment. I left it when I realized people were watching. Webb turned to Phillips with instructions that confirmed Sarah's worst fears about their intentions. Send a team to retrieve the laptop and any other storage devices. Make sure there are no additional copies. Already in progress, Phillips replied. We've had her apartment under surveillance since yesterday. No one else has accessed the location. As the interrogation continued, Sarah began to understand the full scope of Webb's conspiracy and the sophisticated operational security that had protected it for so long. The organization included current and former intelligence officers, private military contractors, and technical specialists who could monitor communications and eliminate evidence with professional efficiency. But she also detected signs that her deception was working. Webb and Phillips were focusing on damage control, identifying and neutralizing the people she'd contacted while remaining unaware of the automatic release systems that would expose everything if she failed to check in with her dead man switches. There's one more issue we need to address, Phillips said as the interrogation entered its third hour. Senator Sullivan's office has been asking questions about intelligence operational failures. We need to understand what information was provided to congressional oversight. Sarah had been dreading this question, knowing that her answer would determine whether Sullivan and her allies could continue their investigation. I only met with her once this morning to provide copies of the files. She said her staff would investigate whether there were problems with intelligence operations. What was her reaction to the evidence? Webb asked. She seemed concerned about operational security breaches, but she didn't seem to understand the technical details. She said her staff would coordinate with the appropriate agencies to investigate. Webb and Phillips again exchanged glances that suggested relief. They interpreted Sarah's description as confirmation that Sullivan's investigation would follow normal channels, where Webb's influence and network could control the outcomes. This situation is containable, Phillips concluded. We neutralize the 4 individuals who received copies of the classified materials, recover any remaining evidence, and the operation continues with enhanced security protocols. The casual discussion of murdering federal agents and a senator revealed the true nature of Webb's conspiracy, not just corruption, but a criminal organization willing to commit any crime necessary to protect its operations. As the interrogation concluded, Sarah was moved to a holding cell where she would wait, while Webb's associates cleaned up the situation her discovery had created. The cell was comfortable enough, a converted office with a cot, basic facilities, and surveillance cameras that monitored her constantly. But Sarah knew that her apparent cooperation had bought limited time. Once Webb's teams confirmed they'd eliminated the other people who'd seen the evidence, She would become a liability that needed to be permanently silenced. Alone in the cell, Sarah activated the emergency beacon Sullivan had given her, hoping that federal law enforcement would respond before Webb's associates completed their cleanup operation. But she also knew that rescue might not arrive in time, and that the success of their mission now depended entirely on whether Harrison, Liu, Torres, and Sullivan could act on the real evidence before Webb's network eliminated them. The darkest hour had arrived. Sarah was imprisoned by traitors who believed they'd successfully contained the damage from her discovery, while the fate of American intelligence hung in the balance. Everything now depended on whether her allies could use the time her deception and sacrifice had bought them to expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. Outside her cell, Webb's associates prepared to murder federal agents and congressional personnel, confident that eliminating a few inconvenient witnesses would allow their systematic betrayal of American intelligence to continue indefinitely. They had no idea that their prisoner had already ensured their conspiracy's exposure through systems they couldn't monitor or control. As night fell over Alexandria, Sarah Chen waited in her cell for either rescue or execution, knowing that she'd already accomplished more than any file clerk in history. She'd given her country's loyal intelligence officers the evidence and opportunity they needed to save American national security from systematic destruction. The final battle for the soul of American intelligence was about to begin. We're approaching the climactic moments of this epic tale, and the tension is at its peak. Creating stories of this scope and detail requires not just writing talent, but careful plotting, character development, and attention to every narrative thread. We've journeyed through nearly 40,000 words together, and I hope every moment has kept you engaged. If this story has drawn you in and kept you listening, please show your appreciation by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Share this epic with anyone who loves immersive storytelling, and hit that notification bell for more incredible adventures. Now let's witness how everything comes together in these final, crucial moments. The NSA's Emergency Operations Center erupted into controlled chaos at 2,347 hours as Dr. Michael Harrison activated protocols that hadn't been used since the September 11th attacks. His authorization codes unlocked surveillance systems across the Washington metropolitan area, turning the full power of American signal intelligence against the conspiracy that threatened to destroy it from within. I have Sarah's emergency beacon active in Alexandria, Harrison announced to the secure video conference connecting him with Senator Sullivan, Agent Liu, and Captain Torres. But I'm also showing multiple tactical teams moving toward locations associated with all of our identities. Liu's voice carried the tension of someone coordinating a life-or-death operation from her FBI field office. I have confirmation that Webb's associates are targeting federal law enforcement personnel. They've requested surveillance information on my location, my family, and my known associates. This isn't damage control, it's systematic elimination of witnesses. Torres, speaking from a naval intelligence safe house in Norfolk, provided the military perspective that was becoming increasingly relevant. The personnel targeting us are definitely private military contractors, probably former special operations soldiers working for a security company with intelligence community connections. They have equipment and training equivalent to federal tactical teams. Senator Sullivan had activated congressional emergency protocols that placed the Capitol Police on heightened alert while coordinating with federal agencies that remained outside Webb's influence. I've briefed the Vice President and confirmed that copies of all evidence are secured with congressional leadership. If they eliminate us, the investigation continues at the highest levels of government. But Harrison's analysis of the electronic surveillance surrounding Sarah's location revealed the immediate tactical challenge they faced. Webb's people have professional jamming equipment around the detention facility. Any rescue attempt will be conducted blind, and they'll have advance warning of any approaching federal response. The secure conference was interrupted by an alert from Harrison's monitoring systems. Sarah's emergency beacon had suddenly gone silent, suggesting either equipment failure or deliberate intervention by her captors. "We're out of time," Torres announced. "Sarah's beacon is dark, and tactical teams are moving toward all our positions. We need to implement the final phase now, or lose our chance permanently." The final phase of their operation was as desperate as it was comprehensive. Instead of attempting a direct rescue that would likely result in Sarah's death and their own capture, they would expose Webb's entire conspiracy simultaneously through multiple channels, creating so much public and official pressure that his network couldn't eliminate all the witnesses. Harrison began uploading the complete Blackwater_contingency files to secure servers at major news organizations, congressional offices, and allied intelligence agencies. The dead man switches Sarah had established activated automatically, releasing evidence that would appear in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and investigative journalism outlets within hours. Liu coordinated with FBI agents she trusted completely, authorizing raids on Webb's known associates, while requesting protection for intelligence personnel who might be targeted by the conspiracy. Her actions triggered federal law enforcement responses that would make it impossible for Webb's network to operate openly. Torres activated naval intelligence resources to protect ongoing operations in Southeast Asia, warning field agents about compromised communications and potential ambush situations. Her alerts would save lives even if they couldn't save Sarah. Senator Sullivan prepared to hold an emergency press conference that would expose the conspiracy to public scrutiny, making it impossible for Webb's associates to continue operating in secrecy. But as they implemented their coordinated response, Harrison's surveillance systems detected activity at Sarah's detention facility that suggested Webb's associates were preparing for a final confrontation. Multiple vehicles approaching the Alexandria location, including what appears to be a mobile incineration unit. They're preparing to eliminate evidence and witnesses. The realization that Sarah might have only minutes to live galvanized their response. Torres contacted Marine Corps units at Quantico, requesting immediate tactical support for a federal law enforcement operation. Liu authorized FBI hostage rescue teams to move toward Alexandria despite the operational risks. Harrison used NSA surveillance assets to provide real-time intelligence about the facility's defenses. Senator Sullivan made the decision that would define the rest of her political career. "I'm calling a press conference for 0100 hours. We expose everything publicly and let Webb's associates explain their actions to Congress and the American people." The detention facility's lights went out at 0047 hours as federal tactical teams surrounded the building, their night vision equipment and thermal imaging systems piercing the darkness that Webb's associates had hoped would conceal their final crimes. Sarah heard the sound of helicopters overhead and knew that her emergency beacon had been received despite the jamming equipment. Inside the facility, Webb and Phillips scrambled to implement emergency destruction protocols, destroying evidence while preparing to eliminate the witnesses who could expose their conspiracy. But they discovered that their prisoner had vanished from her cell. Sarah had used her technical knowledge to override the electronic lock during a power fluctuation caused by the federal teams. Approach. Sarah moved through the facility's service corridors with the confidence of someone who'd spent years understanding how buildings' technical systems worked. She'd memorized the layout during her imprisonment, identifying escape routes and security vulnerabilities that her captors had overlooked. The confrontation between federal law enforcement and Webb's associates unfolded with the precision of a military operation, but also with the legal authority of legitimate government action. FBI hostage rescue teams breached the facility's defenses while naval intelligence assets provided tactical support, and NSA surveillance systems coordinated the operation. Webb made A final attempt to destroy the evidence by activating incendiary devices throughout the facility. But Sarah had already transmitted copies of additional files she'd discovered during her imprisonment, financial records and communication logs that revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. The battle was brief but decisive. Webb's associates, despite their military training and professional equipment, couldn't match the resources and legal authority of federal law enforcement, acting with congressional oversight and executive branch support. Within 30 minutes, the facility was secured and its occupants in federal custody. Sarah emerged from the facility's basement as dawn broke over Alexandria, carrying evidence that would reshape American intelligence operations for decades. Her 3-day journey from anonymous file clerk to key witness in the largest intelligence scandal in American history was complete. But the implications of what she'd discovered were just beginning to unfold. The press conference Senator Sullivan held that morning exposed details of Webb's conspiracy that shocked even experienced intelligence professionals. The systematic recruitment of American intelligence officers by foreign interests, the deaths of agents caused by deliberate betrayal, and the financial corruption that had funded the operation created a scandal that reached into every major intelligence agency. Webb's arrest, along with 17 associates including Phillips and other conspirators, marked the beginning of investigations that would continue for years. The Blackwater contingency files provided evidence for prosecutions that resulted in life sentences for treason and conspiracy, while also exposing security vulnerabilities that required comprehensive reforms. But Sarah's most important contribution wasn't the exposure of one conspiracy, it was the demonstration that individuals within the intelligence community could still act with integrity when confronted with systematic corruption. Her willingness to risk everything to protect American agents and operations inspired reforms that strengthened oversight and accountability throughout the intelligence community. In the months following Webb's arrest, Sarah received offers to join the FBI, CIA, and NSA in senior analytical positions, recognition of her skills and integrity. But she chose to remain with the Defense Intelligence Agency, accepting a promotion to senior systems analyst with responsibilities for monitoring and preventing the kind of security breaches she discovered. Agent Jennifer Liu led the FBI task force that investigated Webb's conspiracy, ultimately identifying and prosecuting foreign intelligence officers who'd recruited American assets. Her work resulted in the roll-up of Chinese intelligence networks throughout Southeast Asia and the protection of American operations that had been targeted for compromise. Captain Rachel Torres was promoted to commander and assigned to lead Naval Intelligence's new counterintelligence division, tasked with preventing foreign penetration of military intelligence operations. Her experience with Webb's conspiracy informed new security protocols that made similar betrayals much more difficult. Dr. Michael Harrison accepted appointment as the NSA's Deputy Director for Internal Security, where he implemented monitoring systems designed to detect the kind of systematic corruption that Webb's network had practiced. His work ensured that future traitors would find it much harder to operate undetected. Senator Margaret Sullivan's leadership during the crisis enhanced her reputation as one of Congress's most effective oversight officials. She chaired hearings that resulted in comprehensive intelligence reform legislation, strengthening congressional oversight while protecting legitimate operations. The agents Sarah had saved through her warnings, Morrison and Park in Bangkok, and dozens of others whose operations were protected by the timely exposure of Webb's conspiracy, continued their service with enhanced security protocols and the knowledge that their own community would fight to protect them. The broader implications of Sarah's discovery extended far beyond individual prosecutions. The intelligence community implemented new security measures, enhanced oversight procedures, and cultural changes that emphasized the obligation of every employee to report suspected wrongdoing. Foreign Intelligence services found their American recruitment operations severely disrupted as the exposure of Webb's network led to comprehensive reviews of personnel security and operational procedures. The systematic approach that had allowed Webb's conspiracy to operate for years became much more difficult to implement. 6 months after Webb's arrest, Sarah returned to her cubicle in the Crypto Intelligence Support Center, but her world had changed completely. No longer an anonymous file clerk, she now led a team of analysts responsible for monitoring intelligence operations for signs of compromise or corruption. Her office walls displayed commendations from every major intelligence agency, congressional recognition for her service, and photographs with senior officials who credited her with saving American intelligence from systematic destruction. But the items she valued most were letters from agents whose lives had been saved by her warnings and families of agents whose deaths had been avenged by her courage. The Blackwater_contingency files that had started her journey were now secured in congressional archives, serving as evidence in ongoing prosecutions and as training materials for future intelligence professionals. Sarah's accidental discovery had become a case study in how individual integrity could triumph over institutional corruption. As she worked late one evening, organizing files and maintaining the digital systems that supported American intelligence operations worldwide, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. 3 days had transformed her from an invisible support worker into one of the most respected figures in the intelligence community. But more importantly, her actions had demonstrated that the American intelligence system, despite its vulnerabilities and the constant threat of corruption, still contained people willing to risk everything to protect their country and their colleagues. Webb's conspiracy had been defeated not by official oversight or foreign intelligence, but by a file clerk who recognized that some discoveries were too important to ignore. The secure communication system on Sarah's desk chimed with an encrypted message from an agent in Southeast Asia, reporting successful completion of an operation that had been protected by the security reforms her discovery had initiated. It was a reminder that intelligence work continued, that agents around the world depended on people like her to maintain the systems that kept them safe. Sarah smiled as she returned to her work, knowing that her vigilance and the vigilance of thousands of colleagues like her provided the real security that protected American interests worldwide. The battle against corruption and betrayal would never end, but her experience had proven that individual integrity remained the strongest defense against those who would sell out their country for money and power. Outside her window, the lights of Washington, D.C. glittered in the darkness, a reminder of the democracy and freedom that intelligence professionals like Sarah protected through their daily work. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new files to organize, new systems to maintain, and new opportunities to serve with the integrity that had made her discovery possible. The story of Sarah Chen, the file clerk who exposed a traitor in command, had ended. But the story of American intelligence, strengthened by her example and protected by her reforms, continued with renewed purpose and enhanced security. The autumn rain tapped against the windows of Sarah's corner office on the 6th floor of the Crypto Intelligence Support Center, a rhythmic percussion that had become the soundtrack to her evening work sessions. At 33, she commanded a staff of 47 analysts and technicians, overseeing digital security protocols for intelligence operations spanning 3 continents. The nameplate on her door read, Sarah Chen, Director of Systems Integrity. But the intelligence community knew her by a different title, the woman who had saved American intelligence from systematic destruction. 5 years had transformed both Sarah and the institution she served. The cubicle where she'd once organized files in anonymous solitude had been converted into a conference room named the Webb Memorial Conference Room, not to honor the traitor, but to remind future generations of intelligence professionals about the cost of betraying their oath. Sarah's current office occupied the space where Colonel Webb had once planned his treacherous operations, A symbolic victory that wasn't lost on anyone who understood the building's history. The changes went far beyond office relocations. The Intelligence Community Integrity Act, signed by the President 18 months after Webb's arrest, had fundamentally altered how American intelligence agencies operated. Sarah had testified before Congress during the bill's development, her quiet expertise and moral authority lending weight to reforms that strengthened oversight while protecting legitimate operations. Her testimony had been watched by millions of Americans who rarely glimpsed the inner workings of their intelligence services. The greatest threat to American national security, she had told the Senate Intelligence Committee, isn't foreign espionage or terrorist plots, it's the erosion of trust within our own institutions. When intelligence officers can't trust their commanders, when analysts can't trust their data, when agents can't trust their communications, the entire system fails. The reforms Sarah championed had created new mechanisms for reporting suspected corruption, enhanced financial monitoring of intelligence personnel, and established independent oversight bodies with the authority to investigate wrongdoing across agency boundaries. But perhaps most importantly, they had changed the culture within the intelligence community, establishing a new expectation that every employee had an obligation to protect the integrity of their institution. Sarah's role as Director of Systems Integrity made her responsible for implementing many of these reforms. Her department monitored digital communications for signs of unauthorized information sharing, analyzed financial data to identify potential corruption, and maintained the secure systems that protected American intelligence operations worldwide. It was challenging work that required constant vigilance, but it was also deeply satisfying to know that her efforts helped protect agents in the field and preserve the security of American interests globally. The evening's work involved reviewing security protocols for Operation Pacific Dawn, a complex intelligence gathering effort targeting weapons trafficking networks throughout Southeast Asia. The operation involved 17 American agents, cooperation with intelligence services from 6 allied nations, and the kind of sophisticated coordination that would have been impossible before the reforms. Sarah's discovery had inspired Dot as she reviewed the operational plans. Sarah couldn't help but think about how different this operation was from the missions Webb had systematically betrayed. Every communication was encrypted using protocols Webb's associates had never penetrated. Every financial transaction was monitored by systems designed to detect the kind of corruption that had funded his treason. Every personnel assignment was reviewed by multiple agencies to ensure that compromised officers couldn't endanger their colleagues. Most importantly, Operation Pacific Dawn was protected by a culture of accountability that encouraged agents and analysts to report anything unusual or suspicious. The paranoia that had once paralyzed intelligence operations had been replaced by professional skepticism that strengthened rather than weakened their capabilities. Sarah's reflection was interrupted by a secure communication from Agent David Morrison, one of the operatives she'd saved by warning him about Webb's betrayal 5 years earlier. Morrison now served as the chief of station in Bangkok, coordinating intelligence operations throughout Southeast Asia with the enhanced security protocols Sarah's department had developed. Director Chen, Morrison's message began, using her formal title despite their shared history of life and death cooperation. Operation Pacific Dawn has achieved all primary objectives. The weapons trafficking network has been disrupted. 17 arrests have been made in coordination with local authorities, and intelligence has been gathered that will support future operations against similar organizations. The message continued with technical details about the operation's success, but Sarah focused on what wasn't said. There were no reports of compromised communications, no unexpected enemy knowledge of American activities, no agents walking into ambushes because their positions had been betrayed. The security protocols her department had developed were working exactly as intended. Morrison's Final paragraph carried personal significance that transcended professional accomplishment. Director, I wanted you to know that Agent Park and I often discuss how different our careers might have been if you hadn't discovered Webb's activities when you did. The agents working Pacific Dawn will never know how many operations like this are possible because of your courage 5 years ago. But we know, and we're grateful. Sarah saved Morrison's message to a secure folder that contained similar communications from agents around the world, expressions of gratitude that reminded her why the long hours and constant vigilance were worthwhile. Every successful operation, every agent who returned safely from a dangerous assignment, every piece of intelligence that protected American interests, represented a victory over the corruption that had once threatened to destroy the entire system. But Sarah's work wasn't limited to preventing future betrayals. Her department also maintained the digital archives that preserved the evidence of Webb's conspiracy, ensuring that future intelligence professionals could study the case and understand how systematic corruption had been detected and defeated. The Blackwater_contingency files had become required reading at intelligence training academies, a comprehensive case study in recognizing and responding to internal threats. The broader implications of Sarah's discovery continued to resonate throughout the intelligence community and beyond. The reforms inspired by her testimony had been adopted by allied intelligence services, creating international standards for preventing the kind of systematic recruitment that had made Webb's conspiracy possible. Foreign intelligence services found their American recruitment operations much more difficult to sustain, while American intelligence gathering capabilities had been strengthened by enhanced security and renewed trust. Sarah's personal life had also been transformed by her role in exposing Webb's conspiracy. She'd received the intelligence community's highest civilian honor, been profiled in major news magazines, and spoken at universities and professional conferences about integrity in government service. But she'd also paid personal costs. 3 serious relationships had ended when the demands of her security responsibilities conflicted with normal social activities, and she'd been forced to maintain operational security measures that limited her contact with friends and family outside the intelligence community. The security concerns weren't theoretical. Webb's arrest had disrupted, but not eliminated, foreign intelligence operations targeting American personnel. Sarah remained a high-value target for recruitment or elimination by hostile services, requiring the kind of personal security measures usually reserved for senior officials. Her apartment was swept weekly for surveillance devices. Her communications were monitored for signs of foreign interest, and her travel was coordinated with security services to ensure her protection. Despite these challenges, Sarah had found deep satisfaction in her work and genuine friendships within the intelligence community. Her closest relationships were with the people who'd helped her expose Webb's conspiracy: Jennifer Liu, Rachel Torres, Michael Harrison, and Margaret Sullivan, all of whom had seen their own careers enhanced by their courage in supporting her investigation. Agent Liu had been promoted to Assistant Director of the FBI's Counterintelligence Division, where she led efforts to identify and neutralize foreign intelligence operations within the United States. Her work had resulted in the expulsion of dozens of foreign intelligence officers and the disruption of recruitment networks that had operated for decades. Commander Torres, now a captain, directed Naval Intelligence's global counterintelligence operations from the Pentagon, coordinating with allied military intelligence services to protect American naval operations worldwide. Her expertise in detecting and preventing the kind of systematic penetration Webb had represented made her one of the most respected officers in military intelligence. Dr. Harrison had accepted appointment as the NSA's Director for Internal Security, implementing monitoring systems that made it virtually impossible for intelligence personnel to engage in unauthorized communications with foreign contacts. His work had prevented several potential betrayals and established new standards for personnel security throughout the intelligence community. Senator Sullivan had retired from Congress after serving 2 additional terms, during which she'd chaired the Intelligence Committee and overseen the implementation of the reforms Sarah's discovery had inspired. She now taught national security law at Georgetown University, where her courses on intelligence oversight and accountability were among the most popular offerings for students interested in government service. The professional relationships Sarah had developed with these individuals had evolved into genuine friendships based on shared experience and mutual respect. They met quarterly for secure briefings that allowed them to coordinate their ongoing efforts to protect American intelligence from internal threats. But they also maintained personal relationships that provided support and perspective on the MISA unique challenges of their work. As Sarah prepared to leave her office that evening, she received a secure communication that reminded her that the battle against corruption and betrayal was never truly finished. The message came from Agent Lisa Rodriguez, one of Sarah's protégés who now worked in the CIA's counterintelligence division, reporting suspicious financial activity involving a senior analyst in the agency's Middle East division. Director Chen, Rodriguez's message began, I've identified patterns in financial transactions and communication logs that resemble the early stages of the recruitment process you documented in the Webb case. The individual involved has access to operational intelligence about activities in Syria and Lebanon, and recent operation failures in those areas might be connected to unauthorized information sharing. Sarah felt the familiar mixture of concern and determination that accompanied discoveries of potential betrayal. The systems she'd developed were working. Suspicious activity was being detected early, before it could cause the kind of systematic damage Webb's conspiracy had inflicted. But each potential case also represented a renewed threat to American agents and interests, requiring immediate and careful investigation. Prepare a complete analysis using the Webb protocols, Sarah responded. I'll coordinate with the appropriate oversight bodies and ensure that any investigation maintains operational security. If we have another systematic betrayal developing, we need to identify and neutralize it before it can compromise ongoing operations. As she gathered her materials and prepared to leave the building, Sarah reflected on how her role had evolved. From accidental discoverer of treason to professional guardian against internal threats. The work was demanding and often thankless, but it was also essential to maintaining the integrity of American intelligence operations worldwide. The drive home through the Virginia suburbs provided time to transition from the high-stakes world of intelligence security to the more mundane concerns of personal life. Sarah's apartment was larger now, befitting her senior position, but it remained subject to the same security restrictions that had governed her life since Webb's arrest. Regular sweeps for surveillance devices, encrypted communications for personal conversations, and careful vetting of anyone who visited her home. But Sarah had learned to find satisfaction in simple pleasures that didn't compromise security. Reading novels that had nothing to do with intelligence work, cooking elaborate meals that provided creative outlet from analytical thinking, and maintaining a small garden on her apartment balcony that reminded her of the world beyond classified files and operational security. Her evening routine included reviewing secure communications from agents and analysts around the world, people who depended on her department's work to protect their operations and their lives. Tonight's messages included updates from operations in Eastern Europe, reports from counterintelligence investigations in South America, and analysis from technical specialists working to identify new threats to communication security. Each message represented a small piece of the vast puzzle that constituted American intelligence operations, and Sarah's role was to ensure that the security systems protecting these operations remained effective against both foreign threats and internal corruption. It was work that required constant learning, continuous adaptation, and unwavering commitment to the principles that had motivated her original decision to expose Webb's betrayal. As she prepared for bed, Sarah allowed herself a moment of pride. in what she'd accomplished and what she continued to accomplish through her daily work. 5 years earlier, she'd been an anonymous file clerk whose discovery of anomalous data had accidentally exposed systematic treason. Now she was one of the most respected figures in American intelligence, responsible for protecting the integrity of operations that spanned the globe. But more importantly, her work ensured that agents like Morrison and Park could operate with confidence that their communications were secure, their positions weren't being betrayed, and their lives weren't being traded for money by corrupt commanders. Every successful operation, every agent who returned safely from a dangerous assignment, every piece of intelligence that protected American interests, represented a victory over the forces that had once threatened to destroy American intelligence. From within, the secure communication device beside her bed chimed softly with an overnight message from the watch center, reporting that all operations currently under her department's protection were proceeding normally. It was a small notification, barely worth noting in the context of global intelligence activities, but for Sarah, it represented something profound: the knowledge that her vigilance and the vigilance of her colleagues continued to protect the men and women who served their country in dangerous places around the world. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats to investigate, new systems to implement, and new opportunities to strengthen the security that protected American intelligence operations. Sarah Chen, the file clerk who had accidentally discovered systematic treason, would continue her work as the guardian of institutional integrity, ensuring that future generations of intelligence professionals could serve with confidence that their institutions remained worthy of their sacrifice. The rain continued tapping against her windows as Sarah drifted off to sleep, secure in the knowledge that her discovery 5 years earlier had not only exposed one conspiracy, but had created the systems and culture necessary to prevent future betrayals. The story of the Blackwater_contingency files had ended with Webb's imprisonment, but the story of American intelligence, strengthened by her reforms and protected by her continued vigilance, would continue as long as there were people willing to serve with integrity and courage. In intelligence facilities around the world, night shift analysts monitored communications and analyzed data. Protected by security protocols Sarah had developed and inspired by the example she'd provided, foreign intelligence services found their recruitment operations frustrated by enhanced security measures, while American agents operated with renewed confidence in the systems that protected their lives and their missions. The transformation of American intelligence, begun by a file clerk's accidental discovery of anomalous data, continued through the daily work of thousands of professionals who understood that their greatest responsibility was not just to gather intelligence, but to maintain the integrity that made their institutions worthy of the trust their countrymen placed in them. Sarah's legacy wasn't just the exposure of one traitor or the prevention of specific betrayals. It was the demonstration that individual integrity remained the foundation of institutional security, and that ordinary people, given extraordinary circumstances, could still change the course of history through courage, competence, and unwavering commitment to doing what was right. The quarterly memorial service for intelligence officers killed in the line of duty always reminded Sarah of why her work mattered beyond bureaucratic procedures and security protocols. Standing in Arlington National Cemetery on a crisp November morning, surrounded by colleagues from across the intelligence community, she listened as the names of fallen agents were read aloud, including Maria Santos and David Kim, whose deaths at Webb's hands had been the catalyst for everything that followed. Sarah placed flowers at their graves, a ritual she'd maintained for 5 years, remembering how their names in Webb's files had transformed abstract evidence of corruption into personal betrayal. These weren't just casualties of intelligence work, they were victims of systematic treason, agents whose lives had been traded for money by someone they'd trusted with their safety. "I never thanked you properly for what you did," said a voice behind her. Sarah turned to find Commander James Sullivan, Maria Santos's former partner, now serving as a naval attaché in Singapore. Maria used to talk about the people back home who kept the systems running, who made sure the intelligence we needed reached us when we needed it. She would have appreciated knowing that someone like you was watching out for us. The conversation that followed reinforced Sarah's understanding of how her work affected people she'd never meet, in places she'd never visit, facing dangers she could only imagine through intelligence reports. Commander Sullivan described operations that succeeded because communications remained secure, assets that stayed safe because their positions weren't betrayed, and intelligence gathering efforts that achieved their objectives because corrupt officers couldn't sabotage them. The reforms you inspired didn't just change procedures, he explained. They changed how we think about our work. Every agent in the field knows that people like you are monitoring the systems that protect us. That confidence makes us more effective, more willing to take necessary risks, because we trust that our own people aren't working against us. As Sarah drove back to her office from Arlington, she reflected on how Webb's betrayal had ultimately strengthened rather than weakened American intelligence. The shock of discovering systematic corruption at senior levels had forced comprehensive reforms that made similar betrayals much more difficult to sustain. The paranoia and mistrust that initially followed Webb's arrest had been replaced by professional skepticism and robust oversight, mechanisms that enhanced rather than hindered operational effectiveness. Her afternoon was occupied by a secure video conference with intelligence officials from allied nations, discussing coordination protocols for a joint operation targeting international arms trafficking. The meeting demonstrated how the reforms inspired by her discovery had extended beyond American intelligence to create international standards for preventing corruption and ensuring operational security. The protocols developed following the Webb investigation have become the gold standard for alliance intelligence cooperation, explained Sir Geoffrey Morrison, Director of Operations for Britain's MI6. The enhanced oversight and accountability measures you pioneered have been adopted throughout NATO intelligence services, creating unprecedented levels of trust and cooperation. The French intelligence representative, Director Marie Dubois, of the DGSE, added her perspective. What impressed us most about the American response to the Webb crisis wasn't just the criminal prosecutions, but the institutional reforms that prevented similar problems from developing. We've implemented comparable measures in our own services, and the results have been remarkable: enhanced security, improved morale, and more effective operations. Sarah listened to these testimonials with mixed emotions. While she was proud that her discovery had contributed to international intelligence reform, she remained aware that the fundamental challenges of maintaining integrity within secret organizations were ongoing. Every month brought new potential threats, financial pressures that might tempt personnel into corruption, foreign recruitment efforts that exploited personal vulnerabilities, and technological changes that created new opportunities for betrayal. Most challenging aspect of her current role was balancing security requirements with operational effectiveness. Enhanced oversight and monitoring systems protected against corruption, but they also created administrative burdens that could slow decision-making in crisis situations. Sarah's department constantly worked to refine procedures that maintained security without hampering the agility that intelligence operations required. Her evening review of operational reports revealed both successes and ongoing challenges. Operation Pacific Dawn had concluded successfully, but 3 other operations in different regions had encountered security problems that suggested possible compromise. Each incident required careful investigation to determine whether operational failures resulted from normal intelligence work hazards or potential betrayal by American personnel. The investigation protocols Sarah had developed following the Webb case provided systematic approaches for distinguishing between operational bad luck and security breaches. Financial monitoring systems tracked unusual spending patterns, Communication analysis identified unauthorized contacts, and behavioral assessment programs flagged personnel whose actions suggested possible recruitment by foreign services. But the most important element of the security system Sarah had created wasn't technological, it was cultural. The intelligence community now operated with the understanding that every employee had an obligation to report suspicious activities, that loyalty to colleagues included protecting them from corruption, and that institutional integrity was everyone's responsibility. This cultural transformation had been the most difficult aspect of implementing post-Webb reforms. Intelligence work had traditionally emphasized compartmentalization and secrecy, creating environments where individual officers operated with minimal oversight. Changing that culture to embrace transparency and accountability, while maintaining necessary operational security, required careful balance and constant reinforcement. Sarah's phone buzzed with a secure message from Agent Rodriguez, providing updates on the suspicious activity she'd reported earlier. Director Chen, preliminary investigation suggests the individual in question may have been approached by foreign recruiters but hasn't yet agreed to provide information. Financial analysis shows unusual deposits that could indicate initial recruitment payments, but communication monitoring hasn't detected unauthorized information sharing. The message represented exactly the kind of early detection that the reformed security system was designed to achieve, identifying potential betrayals before they could cause operational damage. Instead of waiting until agents died or operations failed, the enhanced monitoring capabilities could intervene during the recruitment process, potentially saving the targeted individual from making decisions that would destroy their career and endanger their colleagues. Sarah authorized expanded investigation of the suspected recruitment attempt, coordinating with FBI counterintelligence teams and CIA security personnel to develop a comprehensive understanding of the foreign operation. The investigation would likely take weeks or months to complete, but it had the potential to identify and neutralize an entire recruitment network before it could establish operational capabilities. As she prepared her evening reports for senior leadership, Sarah considered how dramatically the intelligence community had changed since her discovery of the Blackwater_contingency files. The reactive approach that had allowed Webb's conspiracy to operate for 18 months had been replaced by proactive monitoring systems that identified threats before they matured into operational disasters. But perhaps more importantly, the community had developed resilience mechanisms that could contain and recover from future betrayals more effectively. Enhanced compartmentalization protected sensitive operations from comprehensive compromise, while improved communication systems allowed rapid warning of potential threats. The systematic vulnerabilities that Webb had exploited no longer existed. In their original form, the personal cost of maintaining this level of vigilance was something Sarah reflected on as she locked her office and prepared to leave the building. 5 years of constant attention to security threats, of investigating colleagues for potential betrayal, of assuming that every operational failure might indicate corruption, had created psychological strains that were difficult to quantify, but impossible to ignore. Sarah's relationships within the intelligence community were complicated by her role as the person responsible for investigating their activities. While she was respected and appreciated for her work, she was also somewhat isolated by the authority and responsibility she carried. Colleagues understood that their communications and activities were subject to her monitoring, creating inevitable barriers to the kind of casual friendships that most people took for granted. The drive home provided time to decompress from the intensity of security concerns and consider the broader implications of her work. The intelligence community she now led was more secure, more accountable, and more effective than the organization she'd joined as a file clerk 6 years earlier. But it was also more complex, more bureaucratic, and more constrained by oversight mechanisms that, while necessary, sometimes hindered the flexibility that intelligence work required. Sarah's apartment had become a reflection of her evolving role within the intelligence community, more spacious and comfortable than her original modest home, but also more isolated and secure. Regular security sweeps, encrypted communication systems, and restricted access reflected both her importance to American intelligence and the ongoing threats she faced as someone who demonstrated the ability to expose high-level corruption. Her evening routine included reviewing secure communications from intelligence officers around the world, people whose safety depended on the security systems her department maintained. Tonight's messages included thanks from agents whose operations had been protected by enhanced communication security, reports from analysts whose work had been made more effective by improved information sharing protocols, and updates from administrative personnel whose oversight responsibilities had been strengthened by the reforms Sarah had inspired. Each message represented a small victory in the ongoing battle to maintain institutional integrity while preserving operational effectiveness. The balance between security and efficiency was never perfect, but the system Sarah had helped create was demonstrably better at protecting American interests while preventing the kind of systematic betrayal that Webb had represented. As she prepared for sleep, Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction in knowing that her accidental discovery of corruption had created lasting improvements in American intelligence capabilities. But she also remained aware that vigilance against corruption and betrayal would be required as long as humans were involved in intelligence work. The temptations of money, ideology, and personal grievance would always create vulnerabilities that required constant monitoring and professional skepticism. The secure communication device beside her bed displayed status reports from operations worldwide, each protected by security protocols that had been strengthened by lessons learned from Webb's betrayal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new potential threats to investigate, and new opportunities to protect the men and women who served American interests in dangerous places around the world. Sarah Chen had evolved from an anonymous file clerk into one of the most important figures in American intelligence, but her core mission remained unchanged, ensuring that the systems protecting intelligence operations remained worthy of the trust placed in them by agents risking their lives in service to their country. The price of vigilance was eternal attention to detail, constant suspicion of anomalies, and unwavering commitment to the integrity that made intelligence work possible. The story of the Blackwater_contingency files would be told for generations as an example of how individual courage could reform entire institutions. But Sarah understood that her real legacy lay in the daily work of maintaining the security systems that protected American intelligence from internal and external threats. The battle against corruption was never truly won. It was fought anew each day by people committed to serving with honor and protecting their colleagues from betrayal. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 10 years after Sarah's discovery of the Blackwater_contingency files. At 38, she had served as Director of Systems Integrity for 7 years, overseeing the security protocols that protected American intelligence operations worldwide. But the message that appeared on her secure terminal at 0647 hours challenged everything she'd built and threatened to undo a decade of institutional reform. Priority Alpha, eyes only, flashed across her screen, followed by a communication from Admiral Patricia Hayes, Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Director Chen, we have indication of systematic compromise affecting multiple ongoing operations. Initial analysis suggests penetration at the highest levels of intelligence community leadership. Your immediate assessment is required. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she accessed the preliminary evidence communication intercepts, financial irregularities, and operational failures that bore disturbing similarities to the pattern she'd identified in Webb's conspiracy. But the scope of this potential breach dwarfed anything she'd encountered before, suggesting corruption that reached into the offices of agency directors and congressional oversight committees. the secure conference room that had once been Colonel Webb's office filled with senior officials as Sarah briefed them on the emerging crisis. Admiral Hayes attended in person, along with FBI Deputy Director Jennifer Liu, NSA Deputy Director Michael Harrison, and Captain Rachel Torres, now serving as Director of Naval Intelligence. The same team that had helped expose Webb's conspiracy was reuniting to face what appeared to be an even more sophisticated threat. "The patterns are unmistakable," Sarah explained, displaying analysis that had kept her awake for 36 hours. Systematic operational failures across multiple agencies, financial transactions that suggest coordination between corrupted personnel, and communication intercepts indicating foreign intelligence services have multiple assets within our highest leadership levels. Admiral Hayes studied the evidence with the grim expression of someone who devoted 40 years to intelligence work. "This suggests we're facing something we never imagined after Webb wholesale penetration of the intelligence community's senior leadership by hostile foreign services." Liu's FBI expertise provided crucial perspective on the scope of the threat. "If these preliminary indicators are accurate, we're looking at a conspiracy that makes Webb's operation look like amateur hour. The financial flows alone suggest this has been developing for years, possibly since before Webb's arrest." Harrison's NSA resources had detected the communication patterns that first indicated systematic compromise. Foreign intelligence services appear to have learned from Webb's exposure and developed more sophisticated recruitment and operational security methods. Instead of recruiting middle management officers like Webb, they focused on cultivating assets at the highest levels of leadership. Torres coordinated military intelligence perspectives that revealed the operational impact of the suspected penetration. "We've lost 7 major operations in the past 18 months, casualties that we attributed to operational hazards, but which may actually represent systematic betrayal. If the intelligence community's senior leadership has been compromised, every ongoing operation is potentially exposed." Sarah realized that her decade of work developing security systems and oversight mechanisms was being tested by adversaries who'd studied her methods and developed countermeasures. The enhanced monitoring that had prevented corruption like Webb's conspiracy was being circumvented by recruitment operations that targeted personnel with the authority to override security protocols. "We need to consider the possibility that some of us in this room are compromised," Sarah said quietly, articulating the fear that hung unspoken over their discussion. "If foreign services have recruited assets at our level, they would certainly target the people responsible for investigating their operations." The paranoia that followed this realization was both necessary and destructive. Each official began to wonder whether their colleagues could be trusted, whether their communications were being monitored by hostile services, and whether their own actions might be influenced by compromised superiors. The institutional trust that had been rebuilt following Webb's exposure was suddenly fragile again, but Sarah's 10 years of experience investigating corruption had taught her that paranoia without systematic analysis was counterproductive. "We can't let suspicion paralyze us the way it did after Webb's arrest," she announced. "We need to implement investigation protocols that can identify compromised personnel while protecting ongoing operations and innocent colleagues." The investigation that followed consumed 3 months and involved resources from every major intelligence agency. Sarah's department coordinated financial analysis, communication monitoring, and behavioral assessment that gradually identified the scope of foreign penetration. The results were both better and worse than their initial fears. Better because the conspiracy wasn't as comprehensive as they'd suspected. Worse because it had successfully operated undetected for 6 years. The breakthrough came when Sarah identified patterns in operational scheduling that suggested someone with access to the highest levels of intelligence planning was providing advance warning to foreign services. Cross-referencing communication logs, travel records, and financial transactions, Her analysis gradually focused on a small group of senior officials who had access to the compromised information. The final identification was as shocking as Webb's betrayal had been a decade earlier. Deputy Director Catherine Morrison of the CIA, a respected 30-year veteran who'd been instrumental in implementing the post-Webb reforms, had been recruited by Russian intelligence services and had been systematically betraying American operations for over 5 years. Morrison's recruitment had been a masterpiece of foreign intelligence tradecraft. Instead of approaching her with money or ideology, Russian intelligence had exploited personal vulnerabilities created by her daughter's drug addiction and mounting medical bills. What began as small favors in exchange for financial assistance had gradually escalated into systematic betrayal that had cost American lives and compromised operations worldwide. The arrest of Deputy Director Morrison and her associated network sent shockwaves through the intelligence community that exceeded even the impact of Webb's exposure. Morrison had been one of the architects of the security reforms that followed Webb's betrayal, creating the horrifying realization that foreign intelligence services had successfully turned those reforms against American interests. But the investigation also demonstrated the effectiveness of the security systems Sarah had developed over the past decade. Morrison's conspiracy had been detected through the same analytical methods that had exposed Webb, and the institutional mechanisms for responding to high-level corruption had functioned exactly as designed. The congressional hearings that followed Morrison's arrest brought Sarah before the Senate Intelligence Committee once again, this time as an expert witness whose decade of experience made her the nation's leading authority on preventing intelligence community corruption. Director Chen, Senator William Patterson asked during her testimony, "What lessons should we draw from the Morrison case about the effectiveness of the reforms implemented after the Webb investigation?" Sarah's response reflected 10 years of thinking about the fundamental challenges of maintaining institutional integrity. "Senator, the Morrison case demonstrates both the success and the limitations of systematic reform. Our enhanced monitoring systems detected her activities within 18 months of their escalation, preventing much greater damage, but it also shows that determined foreign intelligence services will constantly adapt their methods to exploit new vulnerabilities. What additional reforms do you recommend?" Senator Patterson continued, "The most important lesson from both Webb and Morrison is that technological solutions must be combined with cultural change," Sarah replied. "We need intelligence professionals who understand that protecting institutional integrity is everyone's responsibility, not just the job of oversight organizations." The Morrison investigation concluded with criminal convictions that resulted in life sentences for treason, but also with institutional reforms that built upon the foundation Sarah had established following Webb's exposure. Enhanced psychological screening, expanded financial monitoring, and strengthened cultural emphasis on integrity created additional barriers against foreign recruitment operations. As Sarah prepared her final report on the Morrison investigation, she reflected on how the intelligence community had evolved over her 15 years of service. The organization she'd joined as a file clerk had been vulnerable to systematic corruption, trusting senior leadership without adequate oversight mechanisms. The institution she now helped lead was more secure, more accountable, and more resilient, but also more complex and bureaucratic. The personal cost of her decade and a half devoted to investigating corruption had been substantial. At 38, Sarah had never married, had few close friendships outside the intelligence community, and lived under security restrictions that limited her personal freedom. But she also understood that her work protected thousands of intelligence professionals whose lives depended on institutional integrity. Her final evening in the office that had once belonged to Colonel Webb was spent reviewing security protocols for operations worldwide, ensuring that the systems protecting American intelligence remained effective against evolving foreign threats. Tomorrow she would begin transitioning to a new role, Director of Intelligence Community Integrity, a position created specifically for her that would coordinate security efforts across all agencies. The promotion represented recognition of her unique expertise and moral authority, but it also meant even greater isolation and responsibility. As the intelligence community's chief guardian against internal corruption, she would carry the weight of protecting American national security from its most insidious threats. The secure communication device on her desk chimed with messages from agents around the world, people whose operations continued successfully because the security systems Sarah had developed protected them from betrayal. Each message reminded her why her work mattered beyond bureaucratic procedures and oversight mechanisms. Every successful operation, every agent who returned safely, every piece of intelligence that protected American interests represented a victory over those who would sell out their country for personal gain. As Sarah prepared to leave her office for the final time, she reflected on the journey that had transformed her from an anonymous file clerk into the intelligence community's most respected authority on institutional integrity. The accidental discovery of Webb's conspiracy had launched a career dedicated to protecting American intelligence from internal threats, work that had defined her adult life and would continue until her retirement. But perhaps more importantly, her 15 years of service had demonstrated that individual integrity remained the foundation of institutional security, that ordinary people could extraordinary change when faced with moral challenges, and that the battle against corruption required constant vigilance by people committed to serving with honor. The lights of Washington, D.C. glittered through her office windows as Sarah gathered her personal belongings and prepared to begin the next phase of her career. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats to investigate, and new opportunities to protect the men and women who served American interests in dangerous places around the world. The story of Sarah Chen, the file clerk who had accidentally exposed systematic treason and devoted her career to preventing its recurrence, would continue as long as the intelligence community required guardians of integrity. Her legacy wasn't just the exposure of individual traitors or the implementation of specific reforms. It was the demonstration that institutional security depended on people willing to sacrifice personal comfort for professional duty. As she walked through the empty corridors of the building where her journey had begun 15 years earlier, Sarah carried with her the knowledge that her work had made American intelligence more secure, more accountable, and more worthy of the trust placed in it by agents who risked their lives in service to their country. The price of vigilance was eternal attention to detail, constant suspicion of anomalies, and unwavering commitment to the integrity that made intelligence work possible. The battle against corruption would continue as long as humans were involved. In intelligence work, fought by new generations of professionals who understood that their greatest responsibility was not just to gather intelligence, but to maintain the institutional honor that justified their authority and protected their colleagues from betrayal. Sarah Chen's extraordinary career, born from an ordinary file clerk's accidental discovery, had transformed American intelligence and demonstrated that individual courage could reform entire institutions. Her story would inspire future generations of intelligence professionals to maintain the vigilance, integrity, and moral courage necessary to protect American national security from its most dangerous enemies, those who would destroy it from within.